Hey guys and gals, it's your buddy Drew with Living History's Mysteries and Ferocious Feline Productions. Man, I am tearing up the internet and cyber society looking for the best subject matter to bring you for the 31 days of Halloween here on Living History's Mysteries. It's currently 2:22 a.m. What the am I doing up looking for videos? I mean, I guess it's what I do. When you love what you do it. Hope you guys are enjoying the 31 days of Halloween here on Living History's Mysteries. I'm having a ball with this, finding stories about subject matter that I've wanted to do for a long time, but I'm always paying more attention to the history or the parahistoric than I am just the weird and unusual. Today we're going to take a look at an individual from New Orleans, Louisiana, probably one of the most infamous crazed killers in the history of that city. But is everything we've always been told about are true? Check this out. This is good.
New Orleans, the most haunted city in North America. Between devastating events of its past, coupled with the spiritually charged environment of its people, New Orleans has become the perfect breeding ground for paranormal activity. However, these paranormal stories, they do sell. So you may or may not be surprised to learn that some of these stories are embellished, and some aren't even true at all. One night in 1834, in a beautiful mansion on Royal Street on the edge of the French Quarter, a party for high society members was interrupted by the smell of smoke, and very quickly it began to spread as the house was getting caught up in flames. The lady of the house, Delphine LaLaurie, began begging people to help her move her valuables out of the house and protect them. But onlookers were more concerned about her slaves, and they told her that they should be getting the slaves out first. She ignored the request and continued asking people to help her move her furniture and her things. Soon the fire brigade came, and when they went inside, they found a slave chained to the stove in the kitchen, and that's where the fire was originating from. The slave, barely able to speak, just said the word attic. The firemen went up to the attic, but it was locked. They went back out and asked Lady Delphine for the key, but she would not give it to them. So they went upstairs and broke down the door. Once they got inside, they saw the horrors that Delphine was trying to hide. There was a smell of death that came billowing out of the room. Her slaves were found chained up, disfigured by their owner, and experimented on. Skin was peeled back, exposing the tissue. One had a hole drilled into their head, a spoon sticking out of it. It is said to stir his brains. And lastly, that there were performing sexual changes to them. It seemed that many of them were the subject of improvised medical procedures. There were thousands of residents watching the fire, and they all witnessed what Delphine and her husband, Louis Leonard LaLaurie, a physician from France, had done to the slaves. The slaves were immediately brought to the hospital, and it said either one or two of them passed away. People had heard about how cruel Delphine was. She was once even investigated for the treatment of her slaves. Between her cruelty and her husband experimenting on them, a lynch mob developed in the city, and people demanded Delphine and her husband be put to death. The mob went in and destroyed her home and destroyed all of her things while she and her husband escaped. It was rumored that they ran off to St. Louis. However, it was also rumored that they returned back to New Orleans under false identities and lived out the rest of their days there. The house was eventually rebuilt and had many lives after. It stands as one of the most haunted locations in New Orleans. But, as with many of the ghost stories of New Orleans, not everything in the story is true. So, what was made up? Well, the story did happen, but it got more gruesome as time went on. I added in all the details of all future retellings of the story into one story. It was sort of a big viral story at the time. It made it in multiple papers across continents, and as people were retelling it, some were just reposting the original articles, but some were retelling it and putting different spins on the story. So it got pretty embellished. And the biggest thing that got embellished was the details of what happened to the slaves. The slaves were treated very poorly, yes. It was pure neglect, starvation, and abuse. Delphine was already investigated once for the treatment of her slaves because there was laws in place back then for the proper treatment of them. However, to be fair, everyone who owned slaves at this time were cruel to them. They just did it behind closed doors, and their houses don't burn down and open up to the rest of the world of what they've done to their people. Because, these people still own slaves, so they're not good people. However, it was customary for the slaves in the city to be well kept. People didn't want to look at ones that looked sickly. The sickly ones belonged on the plantation. This is why Delphine was already investigated once before, because her slaves were malnutritioned. So, the whole story is still an absolute horror show, and she was not a good person. But it was just this happened that thousands of people were in the streets and witnessed it all. On top of her not wanting to give the key to the attic, it seems it made people actually act like human beings for once and get angry about the treatment of slaves for just a short time. There is an existing article from the New Orleans Bee on April 11th, 1834 that described what the people saw. There was already some embellishment happening in this article, and even you can see from where this article started and from where the story ended up, you can see how the embellishment kind of grew. The article says, 7 slaves, more or less, horribly mutilated, were seen suspended by the neck, with their limbs apparently stretched and torn from one extremity to the other. These slaves had been confined by the woman LaLaurie for several months in the situation from which they had thus providently been rescued, and they had been merely kept in existence to prolong their suffering. So, parts of the article are true. They were just kind of kept alive or kept existing very slightly. But they weren't being suspended by their limbs, and there wasn't limbs torn off. They were just heavily malnutritioned, starved, and obviously abused by her as well. Now, the other lie in this story is that the doctor was experimenting on them, but that wasn't the case at all. Louis LaLaurie had nothing to do with the crimes. In fact, he and his wife had been fighting so much, everyone knew that he and his wife had been fighting a lot. It was all over town. And prior to the day of the fire, Louis actually had moved out into bachelor's holdings in a different part of the French Quarter. So he wasn't even living there anymore. He never actually ran off with her. That is also part of the lie as well. So he filed for divorce, separation from her. Also, she actually ran away to Paris and not to St. Louis, but she died in Paris and her body was exhumed and brought to St. Louis because her son wanted her buried near him. So that's where some of that confusion comes from, which is understandable. But the doctor actually moved back into the French Quarter and he thrived there and nobody had a problem with him. But over the generations, once the people that knew him had passed on and so forth, the story ended up evolving to say that he was doing medical experiments on them. Now, the place is very haunted. There was a lot of trauma that happened there. There was one of the slave girls that did die. She apparently accidentally fell off the roof while she was running away from Delphine, and supposedly a neighbor witnessed this, but they then also witnessed her burying the girl's body in the backyard, but the bones weren't found till after the fire, so I don't think the story of a neighbor witnessing it actually happened. Now, the building was turned into apartments after, and because of the stories, a lot of the tenants saw an opportunity to make a little bit of money. So they would charge people, like this is back in the day, they would charge people like 5 cents or something to come into their apartment and check out the haunted apartment. But to keep up appearances and to make it more creepy, and the tenants were all trying to make money off of this, some of them would actually dress up in sheets or they would drag chains on the floor. So they were actually making a little bit of a spooky experience, but it was faked. That being said, like the place is haunted, it's just there was a lot of embellishment in the story that happened. And then on top of tenants faking events, paranormal events, and this has muddied some of the stories that come out of this place. You could say that this building has some negative energy in it because in 1894, a tenant who lived in the apartments was actually found brutally unalived in his room. They found his things everywhere and as if someone went through them, but nothing was stolen. The odd thing about this story is that the neighbors said that he kept complaining of things going missing and that there were sprites living in his house. But then he also then told one of his friends that there was a demon there that wasn't going to rest until he met his end. So it's a bit of an odd story. I don't know how much that is really true. And that being said, I tried to do a bit of research on some of these stories and I couldn't find any reports or any news articles about a death that happened in these apartments that year. So I don't know what's really true there. What is interesting as well, this is an interesting story. We don't know if this is true because people have said this is all stories that have been passed down by people who were there. At one point, this building became a girls' school. It was the mid to late 19th century, and at first it was one of the few mixed schools in New Orleans, but politics, etc. happened, and eventually this became an African-American only primary school. Shortly after opening, shortly after everything was going, the girls were actually showing up like bruises on their arms and things like that and saying that they were attacked by a woman. And some people believe that it was Miss Delphine because they think, oh, how would these girls know about this story? They're so young. The story is very famous in New Orleans. So some people think that they were doing it to each other and they were just trying to freak out the teachers, which is totally possible as well. So again, this is something that cannot be substantiated, but it's going to be part of the story that you might hear as well. But tell me, what do you think? There was horrible things that happened here, and there were people that were hurt here, so I do imagine that it probably is haunted. If anything, it's got enough negative energy on it that it could attract other things as well. But leave a comment below and let me know what you think.
Welcome back. It's like I was saying in the beginning. I am trying to make this the absolute best 31 days of Halloween we've had since we started this channel so many years ago. Y'all know how I am about history. You know how I am about the weird and unusual myths, legends, and mysteries from history. October's my birth month. It's got my favorite holiday in it. So why not just go plumb crazy and bring you guys the best of the weird and unusual? I hope you guys enjoyed this look at Madame Delphine LaLaurie. She was an unusual character, and though maybe a lot of what we've always known about her isn't true, she was still nuts, plain and simple. Though she did get away with her crimes against her slaves for a while. Anybody who believes that you're never going to get caught, or people aren't really going to find out, but that's it, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this little look, this little addition to our 31 days of Halloween. There's plenty of the month of October left. Plenty of time for more weird shit. So until next time, take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. God bless you. God love you. We do. Wow. Not even 3 a.m. I've lost my crackers. We'll see you out there.